as you might notice today, I am not at home, and for the first time I am joined by someone else. Hi John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hello everyone, name's John. I've been busy with LARPing for I think the past 15 years, maybe 20 years. I've lost count somewhere along the way, and during that time I've specialized myself in the costuming department. It's one of my biggest hobbies, one of the things I do like the most. So I think that's because of costuming and my specialization there, or that's the reason you wanted to ask me some questions.
Yes, well, it's pretty much the same for me as well. I mean, the reason I LARP is mostly because of the costumes. But something that I specifically wanted to ask you about is you don't build your own costumes, do you? Or not entirely?
No. There's varying degrees in varying costumes, but what I do like to do is to I collect costumes is mostly the way I would put it. Assembling would imply that I build it from an idea from scratch, from fabric all the way up to a complete costume. But what I like to do, both because of, well, let's face it, monetary reasons, and because, well, I can't sew that well, I tend to collect bits and pieces to get to the image I've got in my head.
Yeah, which is a pretty different way of approaching costumes than I do, considering I love to build them completely from scratch. I've got an idea, I think about fabric, and I'm like, wait, those combine, and then I build a costume. So if you've got an idea about a costume in your head, if you collect them, how do you make sure that you get the right pieces for your costume?
One of the things I do is break it down into shapes. Way back when, even before I started LARPing, one of the things I was involved with was gaming and gaming modifications, and I like to read about the things I'm busy with. And back then it was game design, and one of the things about game design is that you have a silhouette. One of the things way back when, if you have a tiny screen with tiny digital people on it, you need to be able to distinguish even from a distance what they are. And one of the things that stood out to me is the emphasis that was on silhouette. And I look at costumes the same way. For me, silhouette is very important. So when I've got a silhouette in my, when I make an idea, I've got a silhouette in my head and I need to assemble pieces that fill that silhouette in the way I want it to. For instance, I am fond of long lines and multiple layers. So when I've got an idea for, and this is where I started really applying this theory, is a witch hunter with the traditional hat and a long coat. So I didn't go to the fabric store to buy lots of fabric so I could make a long coat. I was going to flea markets and second-hand stores to make sure I had a long coat, less so the fabric for a long coat.
So you collect most of your stuff on, well, second-hand shops, flea markets?
As much as I can. Throughout the years I've, if I make a careful guesstimate, 3/4 of my stuff is in its basis found second-hand. Throughout those years. It also helps that I am able to recognize what I can do with certain materials. Because I think that's one of the more important things, that if you go to second-hand stores or flea markets or browse Facebook groups where people dump their old LARP stuff, is that you have that shape in your head and you can recognize that in a given object and go like, okay, it's close to what I want, but it needs to be shortened, lengthened, made a different color or whatever, something along those lines. And then you've got an outfit, and it's, I like the German term for it, Fingerspitzengefühl.
Yeah.
Freely translated for people that don't speak German that well, it's, I think, the feeling with your fingers.
Or
it's
kind of intuition.
Intuition, I think, would be a more proper translation. And, after all these years, I've got that intuition. When I walk into a store, I've got that idea in the back of my head. I know in general what kind of shapes it is, and I can go like, this white skirt, whatever, if I tug it in there and if I dye it that different color, then it will fit the silhouette I've got in mind and it will fit the idea I've got in mind. And you know, that's part of the challenge as well, I guess, because you need to be able to do that.
So you collect most of your stuff on
Yeah.
flea markets and everything, and
As much
then
as I'm
you
able.
adapt them. So
Yeah.
there is still quite a lot of crafting involved after
Yeah.
you buy it.
Yeah, and over the years, I must admit, the amount I buy from flea markets and whatnot has slightly lessened. It's all part of a process for me as a LARPer, for me as a costume maker or collector or whatever you want to call it. Because that idea in my head stays the same. That silhouette goes with the idea. But then I need to get stuff that fit that idea and that silhouette. But it also needs to be a certain quality. So throughout the years, I've been shifting from, slowly but surely shifting from secondhand stuff to adapting to creating from scratch. Because for me, in the basis, I have a certain quality in mind and I need to be able to reach that quality. Stuff I can't make in 1,000 years or adapt in 1,000 years and go like, okay, I'll buy this new. Because I want to have that quality. If I can get that quality by buying, I don't know, second-hand judo pants and dye them black, I'll happily do that. And then you've got the area in the middle where I go like, okay, if I push myself a little bit in adapting, in sewing, in whatever crafting way I need to, I'll do that. So throughout the years, I've been slowly shifting towards that ultimate goal of doing everything myself. But let's face it, buying secondhand is also a fast way and a cheap way, so I don't think I'll ever not do it, because there's distinct advantages.
I can also imagine that sometimes you just stumble across things that inspire you in a particular way as well.
Oh, for sure. I stumbled across one of the recent examples. I at the moment have a pretty big, literally and figuratively speaking, Uruk-hai, orc costume. And the literal big centerpiece of that thing is underneath a American football harness. And I had in mind, I wanted the physicality of the character to be very big. And I stumbled across an American football harness and I was like, yeah, that'll do the trick. Gimme. And I literally built on top of that, but I wouldn't have done anything of that sort if I hadn't stumbled across the harness in the first place. You know, I was thinking in that direction, but serendipity smiled and I found the right bits. It can also be a part of a challenge. I've helped throughout the years a few LARPers to get started, and then the brief you've got is, I want to LARP. All right, it's very broad, but you know, it's a way of thinking, and I help them in that manner, because if you start out LARPing, thrifting is very, you know, budget friendly. If you don't know if you're going to continue LARPing, it's very handy to go into a second-hand store or onto a flea market to say, you know, let's cobble together something that will fit a generic fantasy setting. You can put it on, it will be an excellent base for years to come, and we'll see after that. I mean, if you go thrifting for a costume or for you can go for a warrior look as well, because if you go thrifting for a LARP costume, you don't necessarily have to go on the lookout for clothing. The very first leather harness for my very first character was a ranger, totally not ripped off from Aragorn from Lord of the Rings.
Who doesn't?
His harness, his main harness, is something I still wear now and then today, and it was from a second-hand store basically, because the leather panels from that was from a couch. Just the old leather couch.
So you had leather from a couch and then
Yep.
you weaved it into, or wasn't it a weave?
No, it was literally rectangles stitched to a backing of old fabric, like a sort of poncho with a hole for my head. You can put it on and close the straps on the side, and ta-da, leather harness.
I mean, sometimes it doesn't have to be difficult.
Yeah, I think that's the most important bit, that sometimes people get hung up on making costumes. I've had the luck that I get compliments about how my costumes look, and
They are
sometimes
well deserved.
thank you. And sometimes I get the feeling that people take me for this kind of mage that comes up with incredible things, and I'm like, if you put your backs into it, that's maybe not a very nice way to put it. But if you persevere and just try and have the guts to redo stuff and get into it, I can almost guarantee that everybody will make an awesome costume, whether it's 90% thrifted and just a little bit of handwork put in, or if you go to larpshop.de and buy everything. And there's always, the main ingredient is, I think, always your own creativity and your ability to get an idea in your head and translate it into a physical costume. And though raw creativity might be inborn or not, can almost guarantee that if you practice it, everybody can do it.
Mm-hmm. If someone is a completely new LARPer and they would go and find their basic pieces, say they go to a fantasy LARP and they find either a simple skirt, pants, something like a tunic, what would be your first tip to go from something either thrifted or new bought to a costume?
I think that the stuff that distinguishes between a costume, something a character would wear, and a daily wear outfit are the details. And the literal basis, pants or skirt and a shirt, just pick the right colors and pick something in a fabric that's not all too shiny. And after that, just go hog wild on accessories. Especially in thrift stores. I mean, I don't think I've ever, in all those years that I've made LARP costumes, I don't think I've ever bought a new leather belt. I think 99% of all my belts come from a thrift store. It's an absolute brilliant source for leather belts. Get a few. Look for actual leather belts if you can afford it. But even in a thrift store, actual leather belts are also cheaper. Get a few, old handbags. I mean, I think that's the most basic craft tip I can give anyone. If you want, the traditional square or rectangular leather pouches you see people wear in anime, games, movies, or whatever. Just get a literal leather pouch, an old handbag, the type your mom used to wear. Rip off the belt, make 2 slits in the back, loop the belt through it. Done. Looks awesome, and you're done. That's where you could start. Yeah.
That and having pockets and pouches on LARP is handy.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever been to a LARP where I wasn't grateful for the fact I could carry stuff along. Most LARPs have some sort of, character sheet or whatever you are sort of required to keep with you for the referees, or, items you get, or hell, you can keep a few biscuits in it if you're peckish.
I was going to say snacks.
Snacks are important. And, if you've got that basis, you can slowly, build upon it. I don't think there's better fabric you can get for the rough kind of fantasy look mostly. I mean, I'll be honest, thrifting works, I think, most often for fantasy LARPs, because it's a matter of fact, the old stuff gets shoved to secondhand stores before any, new stuff. And you can't get better fabric than from that secondhand store for a rough look for a fantasy LARP than old fabric from tablecloths and curtains.
That, and you immediately get quite a lot.
Yeah, I have bought a few white curtains a while back. Long enough ago that I can't quite recall when I got them. I'm still using them. They're sturdy. They look, rough and tumble, which is a look most people will want, I think, for their fantasy LARPs. You can dye it most of the time, and ta-da! New coat, shirt, pants, whatever.
And also non-fantasy LARPs. I mean, even if it's sci-fi, or I mean, definitely post-apoc, you don't want your clothes to be completely new.
Yeah, that's true. It's sometimes more tricky, depending on the type. Well, for post-apocalyptic, I would also recommend thrifting. Most of the time, the look you go for in a post-apocalyptic LARP is something of destruction and weathering and all that. And, you know, secondhand items have that free of charge. You don't have to go to town with your own knife or whatever. It's already actually weathered because it's seen actual use. For me personally, what I also include in this category is going to Facebook groups. Most countries with a large LARPing presence have, as far as I'm aware, Facebook groups for specific second-hand LARP stuff. You can get lucky there for a futuristic soldier. But for a futuristic soldier to get it second-hand, you know, you're looking at tactical gear and stuff, and that's much trickier to find. It can be done, and I think that ties into a tip I would give anyone who's looking to thrift a LARP costume is perseverance.
Yeah.
Just keep at it. I've seen, even on a very well-known second-hand website for Dutch people in general, is marktplaats.nl.
Yeah.
And on marktplaats.nl, you've got, eventually you will find everything.
I mean, I bought a gas mask for cosplay there once, so yeah.
You can find everything, but you know, I think that's something that's a tip I would give.
But
Keep at it.
In that case, I think also a tip is start on time.
Yeah, fair. I mean, that's obviously connected. Start on
Yeah.
time and keep at it. If you have a very strict deadline for whatever reason, then going for secondhand stuff is a lot harder to do.
Yeah.
It's the reason, and eBay has it, Marktplaats has it, tweedehands.be, which is sort of the Belgian version of Marktplaats, also has it, is a search alert. You can put in a search if you want to keep it, and it will send you an email whenever it pops up. I've had those, I literally had the same search running for 10 years straight now.
On what item?
LARP.
Just on the tag LARP. Yeah.
Literally LARP, which leads to some interesting results where I'm positive that some AI figured it would be LARP, but...
Or people don't really get what LARP is.
Yeah, there's definitely role playing involved. Anyway, that's a tip I would definitely recommend. Use the search often, don't get discouraged, and keep at it. I think if you want to be a successful second-hand LARPer, that sounds weird. If you want to be a LARPer that successfully gets their costume second-hand, try to identify shapes and try to work up your knowledge about what you can do to materials. If you can dye them, if you can cut them, if you can resew them, if you know, that kind of stuff. Start early, don't give up. I think that's a few of the things I would definitely recommend.
Do you often buy things and then completely disassemble them and then put them back together again?
Not often, but I do. For instance, I was here a minute ago. Here we are. This is a very important item for one of my characters. It's for my witch hunter. It's his official proof that he's a witch hunter and that he can do the awful things he does to, you know, criminals, heretics, and the likes. And this was disassembled and reassembled to make this metal, you know, with all the engraving document holder.
As in, did you do the engraving or?
The engraving was already there. I just assembled it in a new manner.
Ah, okay.
I'll give you a second to guess what it was at some point.
I have no clue.
It was once, and this is the first time I'm going on record to say what this once was. So you're lucky. You've got you got the news. Pepper grinder.
Ah, interesting.
I took out the pepper grinding guts.
Yeah.
Until I had the outer shell left. This thing was, was separate at first. This is hardly to see on camera, but this dome was separate from the rest. Mm-hmm. And I attached it permanently with glue.
Oh, interesting.
And
It's
it's
indeed just looking at an object and, well, basically seeing the potential in it.
yeah, it took a little bit of finagling. This is a drawer pull, this ring. This is some other unrelated bit I had lying around. Disassembled, reassembled in a specific manner, and now it's been a document holder for many a year.
If you look at the individual items, you wouldn't really see that they don't belong together. I mean, they've got exactly the same color and everything.
Yep. And that also applies to clothing, and that's what I mean when I say try to get an idea in your head, try to disassemble it into a specific silhouette and the specific shapes, and keep it in mind while you're browsing flea markets, antique stores, swap meets, the world's your oyster.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a probably very, very difficult question.
Oh boy.
Which of your costumes is your favorite?
That is indeed a tough question. Usually, and I think that goes for a lot of creative people, my newest. I would say at the moment, I think it would be my... can I name two?
Yeah, sure.
Tied first place.
Sure.
That's my witch hunter and my orc war chief costume. Yeah. Those are both landmarks, if you will, from my... I love to call it a career, but of my costuming experience, of my creative career, or whatever you want to call it. My witch hunter, because it was one of the first... No, it was the first costume that apparently got people's attention, that I recognized the potential of making it a thing and enjoying it and doing stuff with it. That I first went, this is enjoyable, I want to do this more often, I want to continue on the path of costume creator, if you will.
Yeah, I must say also, if I think about that costume, stuff you said earlier really ties in there. It's a really recognizable costume with the silhouette and definitely the long lines and everything. Now that you say it, I can definitely see it.
And it's, as it happens, I'm improving it as we speak. Well, not literally because we're speaking to you, but for the LARP Summer Festival.
Nice.
I literally and figuratively speaking am removing some dust and improving it in bits and places. The document holder will play a role in it as well. It's just an important costume to me. It's the first costume I invested in by having a leather hat made. There's a fully custom hat, a bit of an extravagance, but I'll get to the other costume in a bit. But I want to take this little side tour of the thought behind the witch hunter costume.
Go ahead. I mean, costume breakdowns are always interesting.
Well, here we go. The witch hunter is very much inspired by the Warhammer setting and witch hunters in general. There are some very old dark fantasy books, which I don't know the author, but the character he created is called Solomon Kane. That's one of the very first costumes where you've got a pilgrim hat, that's what it's called, which is, well, basically witch's hat with the top sliced off. And then the long coat, some gloves and pistol, sword, whatever your witch hunter is wielding. And I knew I wanted to have that very specific silhouette. The specific hat with long lines for a long coat. And I already knew from looking around that getting that hat was very important and almost impossible to do secondhand. Long coats, there are long coats everywhere. Yeah, in the winter, you can have them as daily wear. So I wasn't too bothered about the coat. I literally went to a flea market, got a long coat, all fine and dandy. But for me, that silhouette was important. So I invested in a very unique piece, the hat. The hat was custom made, later on improved. And you could say that I was able to do that because I saved a lot of money on the total outfit because I got the coat second-hand. Mm-hmm. So I had money left to invest in the hat. So in total I had the silhouette I wanted. So that's also a thing that might intrigue people if they're thinking about getting second-hand items. If you can get the effect you want with a second-hand item on some bits, do it. You've got money left for accessories. That one extravagance that makes the costume pop. Whatever, go for it.
So like have one main piece, or you can look at it in two ways then. Have one main piece and have the rest just
Decent.
add to it, or have your main pieces and have one piece that stands out extra. Yeah.
Exactly. And to get back to the other costume, which I promised I would name as a shared place with the Witch Hunter costume, and that would be my orc costumes, or if I had to pick between them, my first orc costume. I currently play an orc warchief, but before that I played an orc warrior. And that's where I discovered more or less the joys of weathering. The orc group I'm part of is very much inspired by Lord of the Rings and how orcs are portrayed in the movies of Lord of the Rings. It is heavily weathered, more or less dirt everywhere, very rough and tumble, very, 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 very rough and tumble. And I had to unlearn some things to get that costume to look, like a proper orc warrior. Before that, I always tried to make stitches nice, to have symmetry, to keep things clean, and all that. But it doesn't work for an orc.
It's really difficult, I'm finding out now, to not work cleanly.
Writers apparently hear "kill your darlings" all the time. Well, in the costuming world, weathering is sort of kill your darlings. And that's where I, like I said, with the orc warrior, I discovered the potential even in weathering your costumes. And I find it enjoyable, and it's also, I won't deny I'm vain some of the time.
I mean, we're doing costuming.
Very true. And the orc also got a load of compliments, and also very, to tie it into LARP, very interesting responses. People were happily being afraid of this orc and what he could do to them. And that's a very powerful feeling, and that's also why I like that orc costume, because like that orc costume, I've disassembled it for my orc warchief, but for my orc warchief the same thing applies. It's very powerful to have a costume that makes you feel mighty, I guess.
Yeah, but I must say, I mean, I've both stood in front of those costumes and in those costumes. When you just see them, especially if you don't exactly know who the people in the costume are, and the costumes are making that really easy to not know who's in the costume, they are very imposing, so playing scared is not difficult.
And with the added benefit that if, it's a literal mess, let's face it, orc costumes are a literal mess. It's very easy to do secondhand.
Yeah.
With the example I earlier gave with the American football harness, that's literal and figuratively speaking the core of the costume. There's horse tack in it, with rusty bits and pieces everywhere. Secondhand belts, secondhand leather, things I ripped off. I think I actually picked up some rusty stuff from the street once to attach as armor. Funnily enough, at some point, especially for orc costumes or whatever costumes, at some point it becomes practice makes perfect, and then it's less a case, did I buy this fabric new, and more of, I know what I can do with this stuff to make it shine. In a figuratively manner, because orcs don't shine.
And on the same note of killing your darlings, not making your costumes too big?
Yeah. Yeah. They're, for the viewers at home, I'm willing to go on the internet to say this. It's a bit of a divergence from secondhand costuming, but at some point while making this orc warchief costume, I had secondhand bought a reenactment armor piece on one of my shoulders. Apparently, weighing down one of your shoulders a lot more than the other bit makes the costume crooked, and it presses down on your shoulder. Who would have known? And it pressed down in such a manner for such a long time that the pain in my shoulder grew so much that I could only focus on the discomfort and not so much on the LARP play. So the rest of the group more or less forced me to remove said armor piece.
Killing your darlings.
Yeah, that darling was swiftly killed. For the better, because I got another second-hand bit. I bought a visor, a knight's visor of a LARPer who no longer needed it. I banged it up and attached it as a new shoulder piece. So my orc has clearly, at some point, killed a knight.
And with that, also again, telling a story with your costume.
Yeah, it's one big interconnected web of things you can do for a costume. We all like to tell stories, I think. If we're busy LARPing, I mean, it's sort of implied in the whole live action role play. And old stuff tells a story by definition. What you attach to it tells a story. What colors you use, all that. I think I could fill a different video with all that. No, don't you worry.
So yeah, you learned, I mean, through trial and error, stuff that works and doesn't work. Also,
mostly.
Yeah. To finish up, also, for new LARPers, what would you say that the most important tip is, costuming-wise?
The first thing that pops into mind is dare. Have the guts to just go about it. Everybody makes mistakes. Owe up to them and just keep on trucking. I happily show my first pictures of my first costumes. I happily do so. And trust me, they're not as great as my current examples, but I took critique I saw, I took the faults I myself saw in those costumes. I had the guts to keep on going, to keep reiterating, to get new stuff, to throw out old stuff. So I think that's the biggest, most important thing I would tell to any new LARPer who wants to make to arrange their costumes themselves, is to have at it. And that sort of, that guts, don't be afraid to do stuff. I sort of think that also applies to asking others. There seems to be some reluctance sometimes to help other people or to ask other people for help, and it's nothing to be afraid of. We all stand to gain to learn from each other, and I'll happily, if a new LARPer comes with a brilliant idea, I'll happily accept and adapt that idea to something I might do in the future.
In general, what I notice, if you ask LARPers for help, they're more than willing to help. I mean, we're all playing this ridiculous hobby together, and
yeah, at the end of the day, we are all in a forest hitting each other with rubber implements while wearing mother's drapes.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, let's be honest there.
And then also, to finish off, if people want to see more of your costumes, where can they find you?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I have a Facebook page called Eldritch Ensembles. I'm sure you can figure out the link somewhere.
Links will be in the description.
There we go. I must admit, I'm not very active there. At the moment, if you want to find more of me, you can better visit one of the LARPs I frequent, because that's where I showcase my costumes.
Yeah, that's completely valid.
And I am also rather active on the Discord community server of the LARP platform. I poke my head in, especially, funnily enough, in the creative section, in the costuming section.
I wonder why. I
like
that most of all.
Weird, huh? So if you want to see more of my stuff or want to have my input, you can visit us, me, and other creatives there.
Well, thank you for inviting me and having me ask you difficult questions about costume building. And thank you all for watching, and see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.